production funding for Behind the Headlines is made possible in part by the WKNO Production Fund, the WKNO Endowment Fund, and by viewers like you. Thank you.
Retiring Chief Public Defender Phyllis Aluko, tonight on Behind the Headlines. I'm Eric Barnes with the Daily Memphian. Thanks for joining us. I am joined tonight by retiring Chief Public Defender Phyllis Aluko from Shelby County. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Along with Bill Dries, reporter with the Daily Memphian. Thank you for doing this. We were talking before the show. You think you counted 2 interviews you've done over the years. So we really appreciate you
in my lifetime.
In your lifetime. In your lifetime. Okay. You've been under the radar, but doing a lot of work. You've been you've been Chief Public Defender for about 7 years, retiring at the end of January. In the office for, I think you said, 32 years.
That's correct.
We'll talk about all kinds of things, but I want to start sort of big picture. In all your time in the office, what has changed most, or what are the things that have changed most?
Well, that's a very difficult question to answer. A lot of things have changed. We have grown in size significantly since I started. We have changed from being an office that was largely organized around horizontal representation to one that is largely vertical representation now. We have added new divisions. We, when I started, were not working in juvenile court. I hear there's an interesting story around that, because at one time we were working in juvenile court, but we were not working for most of my time in the office in juvenile court, and that changed during Stephen Bush's
your predecessor.
Right.
Yeah. About how many people, lawyers, in the public defender's office?
We average somewhere around 81 to 83 attorneys in our office.
And when you said vertical versus horizontal, what does that mean to a layperson?
Well, it used to be that we had attorneys who only worked in general sessions court, and then another group of attorneys who only worked in criminal court. And as a practical matter, that meant that when our office was appointed to represent someone, if the case was not one that could be disposed of in general sessions court, they would get a completely different attorney with our office when the case went through the grand jury process, was indicted, in a totally different
so the lawyer
attorney.
They started with, then you got to go to a different lawyer and
exactly.
Start all over.
Exactly.
Yeah, okay.
And of course, lawyers don't always agree. And so oftentimes the case would start over with a new investigation, new motions, et cetera.
A couple more facts and figures, and again, it's not a math test, but just to give people a scale, we talked about 80 public defenders. About how many people go through the Shelby County criminal court system a year, total, whether or not they have a public defender?
Right, I can't answer that.
Bill might know, it's tens of thousands of people.
Right.
What percentage, again, not a math quiz, a relatively small percentage of those go to trial. I think it's in the single-digit percentages. And so then not all of them have a public defender. Some would have a private attorney. But still, the caseload for your 80 attorneys in a given year can be roughly how many?
It's, that's a tricky question to answer.
Fair.
Because it depends upon what kind of cases the attorney is handling. So if you're talking about our major cases team that handles murder first degree cases, that's pretty much it. If it's not a murder first degree case somehow attached to that particular client, they're not handling it. Their caseload is much lower because you can handle fewer murder first degree cases in a year than, say, you can handle driving on a suspended license cases. Gotcha. But we make sure, or we keep track. It used to be we barely kept track of caseloads, and I have made an effort to make certain that we keep track of workloads. And I can tell you that we are we're understaffed, given that, but our attorneys are doing an excellent job at maintaining the cases. It's a lot of cases.
Yeah, it's thousands of cases, I would assume.
Yeah,
Again, and then you've got the lawyers, like you said, you carve out in the major cases, but others could be handling hundreds, if not thousands, if they're kind of minor offenses through the course of a year.
I wouldn't say thousands,
Okay,
but
hundreds,
but certainly others if their docket consists mainly of misdemeanors. Can be handling a lot, but there are few attorneys in our office now whose docket would only include misdemeanors because of the switch to vertical representation. And I can say that overall our office is handling more than 20,000 cases a year, and that's probably an underestimate, because there are situations in which we end up handling cases that private attorneys originally handled. For example, if you go to some of the treatment courts, you'll find that once a private attorney's client is assigned to treatment court, it is expected that the public defender follow the case from there on out.
Okay. Yeah.
It's not to say that the private attorney cannot follow the case into treatment court, but usually that does not happen, and we are appointed.
Yeah, we'll talk more about the logistics in a minute, but I want to bring Bill in.
I'm going to talk about TV cop shows and court shows, because
The things I try to avoid.
Yes,
but anyway.
and I understand why. Because if you watch those shows and there is a character who is a public defender, they are usually portrayed as someone who's thrown into the case at the last second, who is kind of saying, well, let's just get through this. That's not the case at all. You have some attorneys there. For instance, if it's a death penalty case, these are what we call capital case attorneys who have special training in those particular cases. So the idea of someone walking into a courtroom with a bunch of files and saying, what am I doing next? There's a lot more preparation than that.
There is more preparation. We try, especially through the vertical representation in our major cases team. We rebranded. It used to be called the Capital Defense Team. But they have always, since I've been in the office, handled their matters vertically. So if our office gets appointed to a murder first degree case, we have always had one team of attorneys that take that case and they take it through disposition. But to your larger point, our attorneys are well trained. They are not people who are fumbling around now. They have become good at triaging cases and being able to see the heart of a case very quickly. So I would say that a lot of our attorneys do work very quickly, especially at the general sessions level. But you can be assured that they know what they're doing, and I have encouraged them to, when necessary, and it's often necessary, to slow the system down so that they can do what they need to do on the client's case. The system is oftentimes wants to operate as an assembly line, and my team can tell you that I'm oftentimes quoted as saying, we're not into assembly line justice. Our clients are individual human beings, and we have to look at them as individuals and their cases in an individual way, and we have to do what's necessary for each case, for every client.
And there are other things that kind of make that more complicated. For instance, if you have a case with multiple defendants,
Yes,
your office cannot represent all of them.
that's correct.
Your office can represent one of them? Is that right?
Yes, I mean that is our perspective. Sometimes we're pushed on that, but our perspective is that when you have co-defendant cases, that we can only represent one co-defendant.
And that's because each client may have conflicting interests
Right.
that don't seem that way at the beginning.
Right, exactly. You never know when conflicting interests may develop, And then if we've represented more than one, now our office is conflicted off of the entire case. We can't represent anyone. And there just aren't enough criminal defense practitioners in Shelby County. And so if you're conflicting our office, who's probably handling, I'm guessing, almost half of the cases, then you're losing a lot of the attorneys who could be handling the matters, and you're just going to run into a situation where there's not enough criminal defense attorneys to manage the docket.
Right, right. We've had a lot of discussions, as you might imagine, on this show about Memphis Safe Task Force, and we've written a lot of stories about the impact that has had across the criminal justice system on the city in general. With the increase in people coming through the court system, what has your office's experience been?
It's been challenging. We've certainly seen a significant increase in the number of cases. Depending upon what divisions you're talking about, it can be anywhere from 50 to 100% increase in the number of cases to which we have been appointed, and it's definitely challenging.
I've heard this before. You can check me on this. Is our public defender's office one of the oldest in the nation?
We are one of the oldest public defender's offices in the nation. We're really proud of the fact that Shelby County citizens saw the need to have a public defender's office before the rest of the country did. You have public defender office in LA, the city, in LA County that was started before us. There's debate over what came after LA County, but we're certainly one of the oldest. If you look at the fact that the first, what's acknowledged as the first public defender's office started around, I think it was 1914 or 1915, and then the citizens of Shelby County advocated for a public defender's office in 1917, and that's when we started.
So this is way before Miranda, way before.
Way before Gideon v. Wainwright. We're obviously the first in Tennessee. I think the next oldest in Tennessee started around 1963 in Davidson County. Right. So we definitely precede any other public defender office in the state, and frankly, one of the oldest in the nation.
Let me talk about, again, and this is maybe even a little bit the perceptions from TV shows and so on, but also one thing that it seems has changed so much in the whole criminal justice system is the ubiquity of cameras, whether that's phones, that's now body cameras on most law enforcement, that could be surveillance. There's just so much video. Mm-hmm. And speaking generally, not about a specific case, for your office, if you're a dynamic that I hear, and I particularly would hear during peak when crime really spiked during COVID, both nationally and here in Memphis, is this notion of there's some kind of camera footage of someone doing what appears to be a heinous, horrendous, violent act. And the public says that person's guilty and should go to jail for the rest of their lives. Why does the system not recognize that and just, it's right there. It's right there in the video. It's right there in some kind of, whether that's a photo or a video. So one of my questions is, how has that changed things? But also just that notion of being a public defender and coming in when your office, your person in your office also saw a potentially very heinous, violent, maybe sexual, like something terrible on video. Do you just rely then on this person has the constitutional right to a fair trial and defense, and we just have to keep exploring this video and things aren't always what they seem? Or, I mean, how do you defend somebody who appears on the surface to have done something really horrible?
Well, I mean, I think all of the things that you have said, we recognize that due process is a process. There's a story behind everything, every occurrence, and it's the defense attorney's job to make certain that the client gets the best representation that he or she can receive. It doesn't mean that we win every case. we count our wins differently. If we have made certain that the system did not railroad our client, if we have made certain that we have done everything that we can to put forth a client-centered defense, then we believe that we have helped to strengthen due process in our system. So yes, I mean the impact of videos, it does have a significant impact on the way we operate. It causes, we're happy, frankly, to have video as another component, because I have found out that it's quite often it ends up helping our defense.
Yeah.
Of course, there are times when it doesn't help our defense, in which case it at times helps our communication with the client around being realistic as to what the results of the case may be. But what we've also found is we've had to evolve technologically, because all of that video, when you get it on, when you get that digital video, you have to have a system that is capable of storing it. Also, we found that you have to watch the entire video, and the man hours that it takes to watch many videos of different camera perspectives of certain incidents. It puts pressure on the system. It creates the need for additional resources within the office to properly review and store the video.
I want to come back, help. You said it very diplomatically of going to a defendant and saying, helping them set their expectations. I would imagine 25, 30 years ago when you started this, someone could tell a story, and I don't mean to say all defendants are guilty, I'm not, but there's a situation where someone tells you as a public defender a story that doesn't ring true, that you've got, but you don't have video evidence, and now you have this video. You can show that to a defendant and say, look, this is pretty condemning, this is pretty certain, you need to reset your expectations. Is that what you were basically, that's the kind of conversation that your office would have with people?
That's the kind of conversation that we have, but we've been happy to have other conversations of things that have been videoed, and now we have proof of what our client has been saying all along.
Well, let me do another one that people talk about a lot, and maybe this is a little TV show, so apologies if that. You have on the prosecution side, I'm sure, the horror of a prosecutor who realizes they've fought a case and they've jailed someone, and they find out some years, even decades later, that person was not guilty because video or DNA evidence or something. Mm-hmm. The opposite for your office, which is you've defended someone, you've gotten someone out in whatever mechanism, and they offend or re-offend, or they do something horrible. How does a public defender reconcile what seems like almost an inevitability given the scale of the criminal justice system, that someone could get out and do something terrible?
Well, I guess we ask the question, what happens if you don't afford due process for every client, for every case? How do you feel if the system locks up someone who's innocent? What is worse? I ask the question sometimes of people who I interview for the office. What would make you feel worse? If an innocent person, the system convicted an innocent person, or if the system let go someone who reoffended or who was not innocent? And that your answer to that question is kind of the line between, I think, whether you're more suited for prosecution or whether you're more suited for defense. For me, the idea that someone who is completely innocent, that the system would lock them up, is such an egregious notion that I believe that upholding the rules, which is what we're doing, making certain that the rules don't apply for the wealthy, don't just apply for the wealthy and not for the poor. That's the way we contribute to strengthening the Constitution. And those rules are there for a reason. They're there because innocent people were locked up. People did not get due process. And that is just something that's, for most offenders, hopefully for all defenders in my office, would be an untenable proposition to think that it's okay to lock up the innocent because you're fearful that someone may get out and reoffend.
Yeah, 5 minutes left in the show. Bill.
You talked about treatment courts where people may go through a recovery process for substance abuse or other problems, with an eye toward their reentry into society after they serve a sentence or are on probation. How do the courts do when it comes to looking not at just guilt or innocence, but what happens after a sentence is served or a debt is paid?
I think in large part the treatment courts are really getting at what I think where the system should be. If we're honest, the system focuses largely on being punitive rather than rehabilitation. And there are, retribution, restitution, rehabilitation, the 3 R's. They're all valid concerns of the system. But when you focus so heavily on retribution, I don't think that the client gets, that the community gets the true benefit of what the criminal legal system should be. And you get the treatment courts that actually are probably the one type of courts in our system that focus heavily on restitution and rehabilitation. And if we can return someone to society, I used to argue in my days in trial court that we don't have any throwaway people. I don't recognize any throwaway people. So if we can possibly return to society someone who will be a positive impact, positive taxpayer, I think that's a valid goal of the system. And you do see that in the treatment courts much more often than you see it in the other courts.
We've come a long way in that. I think the first court we had was a domestic violence court that Judge Ann Pugh presided over. Of course, the drug court with Larry Potter and Tim Dwyer. Now we have a veterans court as well. Is that the way criminal justice is going at a certain level?
That's the way it should be going. I think that we've had some backlash, and so there are some things that we thought, battles that we thought were won long ago, that we're realizing it's an ongoing struggle, and we can't let our guard down. But it is my hope that the system will move towards putting more resources where it's needed, where it will have the biggest positive impact on the community. And I am convinced that is rehabilitative efforts when you can, and that way you leave incarceration for those who the system and the community have determined are most in need of incarceration, instead of locking up everyone.
Speaking of incarceration, we could do a whole show on this, but obviously we've written a lot about it. We've talked about it on the show, the problems at the jail. The problems at the jail, from, I would think, but you'll correct me, from your seat, everyone talks about the conditions of the jail, all the, the locks that don't work, overcrowding, so on, the sanitation and so on, but also the intake. And it's taking days to get people from when they've been checked in for whatever they are accused of doing to actually start their way into the system. What is the real world impact from your seat of the problems at the jail? And I'm giving you a minute and a half, which we could go through with this for 5 minutes, but that's a minute and a half.
Yeah, the real world impact is that in the problems at the jail are coupled with a community shift to say lock everybody up pre-trial unless they're wealthy enough to be able to pay a bond. Apparently the wealthy are not considered a threat even if they're charged with the same offense that a poor person is charged with. So when you look at that, you see the problems at the jail are intensified by the idea that we are, as a community, believe that that everyone who's charged needs to be locked up until their case is disposed. So when you get an overcrowded jail, you're getting people, as a practical matter from our standpoint, we're getting people who just to get out of inhumane conditions are pressuring to plead to things that we know good and well that if they were out of custody and could fight this in an environment that frankly was not, dangerous to their safety, we could probably win the case. So I think the problems at the jail drive what my concern is maybe people who are not getting due process in the court system.
Yeah. Again, thank you very much for that. And we could talk for many a whole hour about that, but that is all the time we have this week. Thank you very much for being here. Good luck in your next act. We appreciate it. Thank you, Bill, and thank you for joining us. If you missed any of the show today, you can get the full episode online at wkno.org, at the Daily Memphian, or at YouTube. You can also download the full podcast version of the show wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks very much. We'll see you next week.